This podcast is about you. Are you ready? Take a moment and ask yourself, do I know the truth, and do I even care? Well, if you care at all, we have something for you. Stick around. We're a podcast that does not ignore the truth about life, people, or God. Larry Kutzler has been a pastor, a Bible commentator, a radio and podcast producer, and now is your host. This is a podcast you won't forget.
I want to acknowledge church hurt and betrayal is a real thing, but that is the most self-righteous pronouncement I think a person can say. Are you serious? The disciples don't bail on Jesus because of Judas. They got their eyes on Jesus. They're blown away by Jesus. They're not looking around going, oh man, all these people are following him, and man, look at they're inconsistent. You're inconsistent. I'm inconsistent. This is the only community there is that celebrates the fact that we're all in process. Like nobody's there yet. Like to demand that you get grace and nobody else is self-righteousness. And to punt on Jesus because some Christian, isn't up to your standards is a dangerous place to stand before a living God.
My thanks today to Matt Chandler, who opened our program with some thoughts about our theme today on church hurt.
We are bringing a bold statement about Christ. He's our only hope to face the darkness in our day. Thanks for joining us for the City Sights podcast.
I think deeply about sermons. Why? Because I know how much time and energy goes into them. They often reflect the heart of the pastor as well. And so today I want to talk about a sermon I heard recently because it was such a revelation to me, and it really is relevant to our church life in so many ways. So we're going to talk about church hurt. And Barna says that 4 out of 10 church-going people, or 37%, have been hurt in some way. My guest is going to define what church hurt is in just a moment. But personally, for many years, I lived with the hurt that I felt that was bestowed upon me by fellow Christian leaders. Some of the hurt fell into the category of betrayal. Some hurt came in the form of, you can't say that in this church, Pastor. Some hurt was basically just disrespect for me and the position I held. In all of these cases, we can feel hurt very deeply. I want to talk about it today with my guest. First, I want him to define it. In the sermon that he preached, here's how he defined it.
See, church hurt, it's real, isn't it? Here's how one guy defines church hurt. He says, it refers to the pain inflicted by religious institutions, its people, and or its leadership. Pain that distances sufferers from their communities and sometimes from God. And maybe you're here today and you're thinking, man, I used to be excited about my faith. I used to be passionate about my faith, but now somewhere along the line, I experienced something that changed that. Maybe you're here and you got a divorce, and after that divorce, you felt shunned. It's like every time you walked into the church building, you had the proverbial D on your chest. Maybe it was for you as you were shamed into legalism. Or maybe it was you were talked about. Or maybe you felt and experienced a church fight for the first time. Anybody ever been and experienced a church fight? I remember as a kid going to the annual business meeting, hanging out under the pew with popcorn because it was so exciting that there was a church hurt. But as a kid, it was entertaining. But as an adult, it's devastating. See, church hurt can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. Maybe you had an addiction that resurfaced, and when you thought people needed to walk into your life, that seemingly they walked out of your life, and now you feel isolated and alone. Maybe it was a pastor that you loved, and words like indiscretion and scandal and embezzlement were attached to the one that you put a lot of respect in. And so because of that, you're maybe guarded with church, that maybe with church leaders and church pastors, that there is a looming suspicion in the way that you relate to this thing called church.
That's the voice of the senior pastor or lead pastor, Heath Beard from Baxter, Minnesota, and the Heritage Church there. Pastor, I've enjoyed coming to church the last couple of weeks, enjoying your sermons. You're very animated and really quite right on in everything you've had to say. So why was this particular theme important to you?
Man, it's good to be here. I love your animation. I think we're kindred spirits, man. It's a good thing this is just audio only because it will temper my animation. But anyhow, I think we went into a series of talks called Healed, and there's a lot of reasons why people are hurt. And one of those ways is the church is really really good at kicking each other, and sheep bite, the old adage, and really good at kicking people while they're down, and in what we would call spiritual cannibalism, eating our own, right? And so I think it's really something that we can talk about that disarms the enemy in a way that we talk about the elephant in the room instead of acting like he's not there. And I think that's a great approach. And so I think it's important to talk about it, to process with people what is hurt, what's not, and so on and so forth. And there's so much scripture about hurt, and there's moments in scripture that, of course, I talk about Paul had been hurt. So yeah, the proverb says that human spirit can endure a sick body, but who can bear a crushed spirit? And I love that. So that's a big deal.
Well, I think every pastor, every church leader has been hurt in some way. And I know I carried a long time, in fact. And every time I thought of that person or those people, I was hurt. I felt just angry about it, and I just couldn't shake it. In fact, I have a pastor friend down in the Twin Cities who talks about the woundedness of so many of the parishioners that come to church every Sunday, and they're carrying the same wound or hurt over and over and over again, and they just don't ever seem to get healed, Pastor. They just don't seem to get free from the thing that's just so in bondage. I mean, I'm sure you see that in your own ministry, correct?
Yeah, and I didn't mention this in the talks at all, but this is what's beautiful about a podcast is you can elaborate a little bit more beyond the Sunday. And when I first was in ministry, I was underneath a guy who was getting ready to retire, and within 5 years, and the church was on decline. And so I kind of looked at that as, yes, I was on the staff, but I was very much so part of the church. And it created, I bet I was 22 years old, fresh in ministry. And it really created a moment in my life that if I hadn't got out of that, and if I didn't get healed, it would have created a greater hurt. It would have brought disillusionment in my faith. And I knew that. And I mean, it was crazy because, I could elaborate just on what happened. I mean, the church was in decline. The pastor was wanting to grow. He brought me in as a youth pastor. And basically, day one, brought me into the sanctuary and said, hey, this is where I want the youth to sit. And he said this. He said, if you don't produce here, you're done. As I was following a youth pastor whose wife left him for a boyfriend. So the youth students were tore up. And I felt like the Lord wanted me to go in and just bring health because healthy things grow. So we came into about 5 to 10 students that were broken. And so through the course of 3 or 4 months, he said, I want you to have 100 students by Christmas. And one time in our staff meeting, he looked at me and said, if you don't grow this church, I'm going to break your legs. And that's literally the truth.
Wow.
I'm not making it up. That's not hyperbole. He said, heads will roll. And so that was about October. We had 30 to 40 students at that point. He said, you need to have 100 by Christmas. We came to Christmas. We only had 60. And then January, right after Christmas, he pulled my wife and I in and said, we no longer need your services. And then he proceeded to tell our youth students that the reason that I was basically let go or fired was because we had marriage issues. And so it really kind of created this crazy, it was church hurt. That's what it was. So I speak from a level of not a theory, but really a reality that I lived in my own life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's the deal. And so I could have walked away from church. I could have walked away from the call of God on my life. I could have walked away from the Lord, worst of all. So it was just a it was a mess. And I could tell you other stories too, but that's crazy.
Well, I'm glad, Pastor, you didn't walk away. And I'm sure that experience has tempered your heart and sensitivity toward people who are hurt. Here's something I don't understand. And it's a something I've carried with me for a long, long time, because we as evangelicals love to talk about relationships, right? I mean, we have this relationship with the Lord. That's what our theology is all about. And yet, Pastor, we do relationships so poorly, like that pastor talking to you about breaking your legs. Wow. Now, that's not really relationship unless you're in the WWF, right?
It's true, man. But it's so funny because the greatest relationship that I have on this earth is my marriage.
Yes.
And so I think it's so funny because people, when they come into church, I mean, at best, my wife and I, at best, agree probably 85% of the time, at best. And so at best, we're functioning at 85% of the time, which means 15% of the time, I'm frustrated. She wants to choke me. She wants to hurt me. So I think we translate that into church. Two people doing marriage that are sinful. Perfect died in the garden. It did. So, let's quit chasing the oasis of perfection, because that's not on the earth, right? Perfection died in the garden. And so the highest level of intimacy and closeness on earth is in a marriage. And at best, it's in my own life, it's 85%. Why would the church be any greater than 85%? So the 100% quotient is gone. There's no way in the world. We're chasing an illusion if we think that we're going to be anywhere. You can't even go to McDonald's and have 100% agreement all the time. And so why do we think that we are going to have a 100% moment where it's going to be a utopia on a fallen world? Because it's not. So I think that we got to understand, anytime you have people, you have sin, because we're all sinful, and you're going to bring that into relationship. Now, I will say, help us to walk in the Spirit so we don't fulfill the lust of the flesh. So the idea that if the greater I walk in the Spirit, I'm going to produce fruits of the Spirit in my relationships. And so we're all people, we're all progressing, we're all getting better. And there's moments in my own life, my own marriage, and I'm shameful of myself because I expressed myself in a way that wasn't godly. Yeah. And so I know I've hurt people, Larry. I know I have in my own pastoring. And I repented in that morning for times and things that I don't even know. I think it's important for us to be vulnerable in that way. So,
yeah, you did. I think that you did a great job with that. I think that you're right. I think there's a certain amount of us that we're not always 100% on target, right? I mean, we just aren't, because we are sinful. You talked a little bit more about church hurt, what it is not. And I appreciated this, because I think sometimes we kind of convolute things together to thinking, well, that must be church hurt. And you went on to say there are 5 things that are not church hurt.
So I want to start this by saying, I want to give you 5 things that church hurt is not. Church hurt is not. Because I think a lot of times people, they call something church hurt when it really isn't church hurt. First thing is disagreement. How many of you know that just because a decision is made different than what you would do, that doesn't mean that you've been hurt? Now, I will say that disagreement can be handled in a hurtful way. That's where the hurt comes. But disagreement in its purest form isn't church hurt. Just like in my life with my wife this week, I wanted pasta, she wanted salad, right? We ate salad. I didn't look at her and I didn't say, I'm hurt because you think I'm chubby, right? Just we disagreed, we decided, we moved on in its purest form. Disagreement isn't church hurt. Number 2, church hurt is not confrontation. The moments that I've grown the most is when somebody called me out in a godly way. The moments that I've grown the most is when somebody cared enough to confront me in a biblical, private, other-centered, heart for me first kind of way. They sat down with me, they shared scripture, they cared about me, they loved me, and it called me to a place to be better. So church hurt isn't confrontation. Love is not always fluffy. Sometimes love is tough, and it's evidenced by the proverb that says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. So there's sometimes that somebody wounds me, but it's for my benefit. Confrontation isn't church hurt. Number 3, it's not a church hurt, is an accountability. Somebody holding me accountable to a standard. That when I said yes, somebody should hold me and witness and hold me to my vow of yes. When I said no, they should hold me to a vow of no. And accountability isn't church hurt. Here's the next one, and number 4 is it's being told no isn't church hurt, right? Maybe you had this idea, or you wanted the church to do this or do that, and for whatever reason it couldn't be done or it wouldn't work. And now you associate being told no with your church hurt. Church hurt is not being told no. Maybe it was a team that you wanted to join, and they said, you're a 10, just not in this area, and so you carry this hurt. Well, can I just be honest? That's not church hurt. Here's the next one, number 5, and it's one that I was trying to think of how to kind of name. I landed on false assumption. Because how many know we see into what we assume? And the problem that begins with that is sometimes we don't realize that there's a humanity of our behind the scenes with people and particularly with leadership. And so sometimes we can evaluate and assume certain things that are accurate because we don't possess all the information, and in doing so put up walls that grow into bitterness.
And I can relate to that. I've assumed so many things in my life about people and situations and church decisions, and wow, when I really found the truth out or more information, I realized, well, that isn't a bad decision, right?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, it's so interesting because, when a decision is made in a local church and there's a direction that's determined, there's a lot of factors that are involved in that. And I would offer to say the larger a church becomes, the more factors that are involved.
Correct.
And that's a recipe. I mean, it just is. It's a recipe for a lot of church hurt. There's a lot of things that are done. Church life, people will use the God card. I hate the God card, but yet there is a God reality. I mean, hopefully the churches and the leadership are seeking the Lord for what they're doing in any given moment in their mission and vision for the church. And so I think sometimes it's interesting because a lot of people in church will have some opinions and thoughts, but the part of what is the vocation of a pastor is a designated period of time to hear the voice of the Lord. And so hopefully you're attending, or I'm attending, a church where the pastor is praying. It's no different than I had a plumber the other week come to my house, and I didn't scrutinize the plumber for what he was doing with the pipes.
Yeah.
Because the plumber is trained and has given his life to know what is good and what is not good. And so I think, and I can appreciate the reality of hopefully our leadership in local churches are seeking the Lord, not that they get it right all the time, not that they should use the God card, but that they would be hearing the voice of the Lord with a team of people around them, deacons, staff, elders, that can really flesh out where the church goes. And so in that, you kind of have these subcategories of disagreement, confrontation, and accountability, and being told no. There's a lot into that. I know that. And so it's just interesting how we assume certain things are church hurt, but are really not church hurt. They're more disagreement. They're more I was confronted because maybe I'm living in a way that's not pleasing the Lord, and somebody cares enough to confront me. So a lot happens in that area of community in a local church.
That's right. And pastors have a hard job. They really do. I remember when I was pastoring, my next door neighbor said, well, when are you going to get a job? You only work an hour on Sunday. And I go, yeah, right. But, let's just say, for example, Pastor, you've got a tension in the church. There's something dicey going on in the church, and, you're misunderstood, or the church is misunderstood, or people are just plain mad. So I'm going to give you 3 multiple choices what you would like them to do. Well, number 1, you would like them to gossip about you in the church, right? But number 2, punch you out after church. And number 3, come face to face and talk with you. Which one would you prefer?
Well, it's interesting because, I look at the punch you in the face thing. I had when I first came to this church. It was a great church. The reason I had came is because they had felt like they had lost their way vision-wise. And so we started working on vision and clarity of direction for where God had the church be. In fact, Will Mancini writes a great book, Church Unique, that really kind of uses a lot of things to help a church really kind of discover what God is saying to them, and it kind of looks at a lot of external things, internal things of the church. Anyhow, the point is, I had a guy come up to me, an Italian guy, probably 60, and he pulls in close. I'm like, what is this guy doing? He enters the bubble. Do you know the bubble, Larry?
Sure.
The bubble.
Yep.
And he starts tapping me a little bit on the face, he's an Italian guy. And he says this, you don't give a F about the old people in this church, do you? And so I was like, whoa. So the answer is not number 2, punch me in the face. I think conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Matthew 18.
Yes.
Here Jesus says, go to the person that created an offense. And he even goes farther enough to say, hey, when you bring your gift to me and there's something in a brother, leave your gift, go make it right, and then come back and present the gift to me. That God values us on a horizontal level being okay before him and I on a vertical level are okay. So I want you to be good with your brother. Mm-hmm. It's just like having kids in our family. I hate when my kids are fighting. And I'm like, I would rather you and me fight than you guys fight, right? It's interesting. So I think you're right. I think conversation, I think honesty, I think transparency are majorly important in a local church and in relationships.
Well, if you're hiding something because it's festering, it's only going to continue to fester. That's why you have to talk it out and be honest, be respectful, respectful to the pastor or church leader, but you can be honest about how you feel. You concluded this sermon, Pastor, rather brilliantly. I love the way you ended it. I mean, it was kind of came out of the, around the corner, so to speak. But you talked about relationships in the last days, and I thought it was so good because you're right. Relationships in the last days are going to be really hard. Here's what you said.
If you have your Bible, Matthew chapter 24, let's look at it. This is what Jesus is showing, a picture of what the end days will look like before the return of Christ. And he mentions a few things, but one thing I saw that I was intrigued about that is really connected to this idea of church in Matthew chapter 24. Let's look at it. Verse 10. It says this, and then many will be offended. Everybody say offended. Now watch the progression. Will betray. Everybody say betray one another. And will hate. Everybody say hate one another. So hurt inside the church. And then verse 11, look what the enemy does. He always sends backup to add to your hurt. He's always going to have reinforcing voices in your life that will say, oh, I'm so sorry, papito. I'm so sorry. Pobrecito, senor. You're so hurt. He'll always add voices to the hurt in your life. He'll send people. That's what he does. So understand that when you get offended and you start, and there's betrayal and there's hatred, the enemy is so good that he'll send up backups to validate and justify the brokenness in your life, right?
You went on and you had some ministry time there. I thought it was so good. But it brought me to the point of asking the question, how many people in my life must I forgive that I haven't? And so I went down a list of folks, not a large list, but there were a few that I just have never been able to forgive for one reason or another. So it was really convicting for me. I don't know how other people felt, but maybe you have some response from that.
Yeah, I think, I love the word. I think the word really works. And so I think in that message, I didn't get to elaborate on this like I wanted to, but Colossians 3:12 through 14 really speak to some action points when we, and I think really are more prudent to the last days in our behavior towards one another. And I can just kind of unpack that for a second. It says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves, that's the first one, with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So his first action word is, I want you to clothe yourself with these things. And then look at this, bear with each other. I love that. Bear with each other. In other words, don't give up on me because I hurt you. I've offended you. Bear with me. Put up with me. Yeah, I love that. It's number 2. And then look at this. Give one another, which is what we're going to talk about. If you have any grievances against someone, and I love this because he throws this in, and this gets me every time. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Oh, that's rough, right? That's rough. Larry. I'm like, I got to remember that everything I've done to someone or have had done to me, Jesus operates in a level of forgiveness greater than that, right? Oh, that gets me. And then he says this, verse 14, over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Clothe yourself, bear with each other, forgive like Jesus is forgiven, and then put on love. And I love forgiveness, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of forgiveness, and I'll break it down this way. Forgiveness is a one-man sport. Reconciliation is a two-man sport. Let me say it this way. Forgiveness is a gift that I give myself. It has nothing to do, in essence, with an apology from the other person. It is something that I choose to not rerun the hurt that has been done to me. I release that person in my own heart. Now, reconciliation is the idea that a reciprocation of an apology from another person. So that person comes and there is a repair in the relationship. So sometimes I may or may not get reconciliation, but I can always have forgiveness. And so the point is that because I forgive, that doesn't necessarily mean I have to put myself in a position to be hurt again. Sometimes that means I've got to walk. Sometimes that means I need to delete a phone contact. Sometimes I love that person, I forgive that person, I release that person. But reconciliation lends towards more relational moments. Forgiveness is I release that person regardless of whether I have reconciliation. Yeah, so I think that's important for us to understand that sometimes forgiveness is me understanding that I release you, but I don't have to have a relationship with you.
Well, I think that's good, Pastor. I think sometimes we think, well, I have to forget everything. Well, no, I think sometimes forgiveness means I remember it as a history lesson. I don't hold this against you. And one of the things that ties in with what you said there is Jesus in Matthew 6, verses 14 and 15. I didn't see this for a long time. He said, you'll be forgiven in the same way that you forgive. And all of a sudden, forgiveness takes on a whole different meaning, So, Pastor, you're the lead pastor there at Heritage Church in Baxter, Minnesota. When can people come and see you? If they like what they're hearing here today in this interview, how can they get to see you on the weekend or during the week? How does this work at Heritage?
So we have we have a thing called our Sunday starts on Wednesday. So what we start our weekend gathering on our Wednesday at 6:30. That is not online. That is not recorded. And then Sundays at 9 and 10:45. Those are online on you can go to our Facebook page. You can, we're on YouTube. You can go to our website at iamheritage.org. Come after the first of the year, we're seeing some growth. And so it looks like perhaps that we'll be doing 3 gathering times on a Sunday morning. Yeah, it's wonderful. So, man, I really appreciate this, Larry. What a joy to be able to be with you and to process kind of some of this stuff about church hurt.
The late David Wilkerson once said that the end of days would bring no distinction between light and darkness. This new hue would be a gray of compromise and tolerance. The gospel of Jesus Christ does not compromise to become gray, but is distinctive in telling the truth. To follow Jesus means your message is narrow, and it stands alone among the ideas found in our world.
This isn't the end. It's only the beginning of your journey to trust God for the truth you never want to lose. We can help. Log on to citysitesurbanmedia.com today. Remember, there's only one truth and only one God, and you should know them both.